Civilizations separated by oceans 2000 BCE independently mapped the identical terrifying journey to the afterlife. Guarded gates and a dark river. Around 2000 BCE, Mesopotamia charted Irkalla, a dark underworld of guarded gates and judgment. But thousands of miles away, in Egypt, priests were crafting the Duat, a mirror image with 12 guarded gates and a final court. Later, the Maya, with zero contact, built Xibalba, 9 layered levels, houses of trial, death lords. This isn't coincidence. This is a pattern, a structural DNA found across 5 continents. Archaeologists, neuroscientists, and mythologists have argued for decades over what this statistically improbable convergence truly means. It forces us to ask if these weren't just stories, but blueprints. Why do humans instinctively describe the incomprehensible journey of death using architectural terms, rooms, corridors, gates, rivers? It's because death is a spatial problem for a brain built for spatial reasoning. We navigate thresholds every day. Our minds use these cognitive tools to map the after, even if it's unseen. Carl Jung argued for a collective unconscious, a reservoir of archetypes shared by all humans. His patients, even illiterate ones, spontaneously produced images matching ancient mythological motifs from cultures they'd never studied, suggesting these maps are already inside us. But if these universal maps are indeed within our minds, what precisely are they trying to chart? Imagine 2 civilizations, thousands of miles apart, around 2000 BCE, simultaneously conceiving the same terrifying journey beyond life. Mesopotamia's descent of Inanna describes Irkalla, a subterranean realm crossed by a dark river, accessed through 7 guarded gates. At the same time, Egypt's Book of the Dead guided souls through the Duat, a dark realm with 12 guarded gates and a final divine judgment. These weren't isolated dreams. They were detailed, functional architectural plans for the unseen. These earliest written models established the foundational elements, the thresholds, trials, and guardians that would echo for millennia, becoming the universal draft. But these initial blueprints, drawn in cultures with no known interaction, would quietly dictate every imagined afterlife that followed, globally.
Could these early parallels simply be isolated coincidences, or does a larger, undeniable pattern exist? Researcher Gregory Shushan spent over 2 decades cross-referencing afterlife beliefs across ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, and Mesoamerica. His book, The Next World, identifies structural invariants, the same features appearing independently. Almost universally, afterlife maps share a boundary to cross, river Styx, Maya cenotes, a progressive journey through layers, Duat's 12 hours, Tibetan bardos 49 days, gatekeepers and trials, 42 Egyptian judges, Xibalba's 6 houses of terror, and a final judgment, weighing of the heart. Humans consistently turn the unknown into a map, none leaves the dead in a void. But if these fundamental elements are not merely invented, what underlying force is truly responsible for their global consistency? For centuries, the prevailing view told us these were just myths, imaginative stories, unique to each culture, born from local fears and beliefs. But the statistical anomaly is too profound to dismiss. If these were purely cultural fictions, the overwhelming overlap, the rivers, the trials, the judgment halls, would be random, not identical structural DNA across isolated civilizations. The lie of pure, unguided imagination ignores decades of cross-cultural evidence. It's a convenient explanation that struggles to account for why the Maya, in 763 CE, calculated the solar year to within 17 seconds of NASA, then drew an underworld indistinguishable from one described 2,000 years earlier by the Sumerians. But if our collective imagination isn't the sole architect, Then what startling source is building these blueprints? You might still think, similarities, sure. But truly identical blueprints across continents? Place the Egyptian Duat, Maya Xibalba, and Tibetan Bardo side by side. The Egyptian journey has 12 hours of gates. Xibalba has 9 descending layers. The Bardo unfolds in 3 phases over 49 days. All demand specific knowledge or endurance to survive. The Egyptian weighing of the heart directly parallels the Tibetan Dharma judges. Xibalba's houses of terror structurally mirror Mesopotamia's 7 gates. This isn't suggestive, it's a terrifyingly precise, definitive match. The coincidence explanation collapses completely. And it's at this breaking point of coincidence that science steps in, suggesting these universal maps aren't drawn by culture, but by the biology of the dying brain itself. If not purely cultural invention, what empirical data could ancient societies have collected to create such convergent maps of death? The neurological template theory posits that a brain shutting down produces a predictable sequence of experiences: light, tunnels, a sense of journey, encounters with figures, a life review, and a loss of identity. Ancient shamans, near-death survivors, and deathbed visions provided recurring data. These weren't inventions, they were consistent reports across generations, cataloged as faithful transcriptions of what it actually feels like when the human brain begins to die. The descent of Inanna details her 7-gate stripping of identity, mapping precisely onto this neural shutdown. But to truly grasp this, you need to understand the precise, terrifying architecture of the brain's final moments. How could a failing organ like the brain construct such vivid, detailed experiences of corridors, judges, and terrifying figures? As the brain loses oxygen, it doesn't just go dark. The occipital cortex fires first, producing vivid lights and geometry. Frontal lobes disconnect, detachment from self. The hippocampus misfires, sense of moving through unfamiliar space. And the amygdala, the fear center, remains active longest, generating the guards and trials. The temporal-parietal junction, our sense of occupying a body, fails last, causing out-of-body experiences. This neurological cascade is the literal blueprint for the afterlife's labyrinth, generating the very patterns of passage, trial, and judgment seen in every ancient text. But no ancient text predicted this precise neural process with more unsettling accuracy than one hidden for centuries in the Himalayas. Of all the world's afterlife maps, which one reads like a neuroscience manual written 3 centuries ahead of its time? The Tibetan Bardo Thodol, written in the 8th century, describes a 49-day journey of consciousness after death. It details sequential physical dissolution, followed by a blinding clear light, then encounters with peaceful and wrathful deities. Carl Jung recognized the Bardo's wrathful deities as the psyche's repressed shadow. Modern researchers, like Rick Strassman, found his DMT subjects independently reported the same stages, tunnels, and blazing light, despite never having read a word of Tibetan Buddhism. The match is structural. And this terrifying geometry of the dying mind reveals a far more profound, and unsettling, purpose for the labyrinth itself. If death is a terrifying journey through a maze of dissolving identity, why design it that way? Why not a straightforward path to peace? The labyrinth's terrifying complexity isn't a design flaw. It's the brain's heroic, dying attempt to maintain navigation, to impose order on sensory collapse, right up to the final moment. It reaches for the deepest spatial templates, architecture, passage, threshold. The value isn't monetary, it's the profound gain of stripping away everything that isn't essential. Mesopotamia's Irkalla forced Inanna to surrender her crown, her rings, her royal robe at 7 gates. What cannot be stripped away by this ordeal, what remains, is what you truly are. But if the destination is only reached by ordeal, then the way through the labyrinth becomes the most crucial knowledge of all. If these maps described something real, what good were they? Were they simply tales to scare the living? Every culture that built an afterlife maze also built a way through it. The Egyptian Book of the Dead wasn't a chronicle of doom, it was a guidebook of spells and passwords. The Bardo Thodol is a manual, teaching recognition of the mind's own projections. The Maya Popol Vuh records the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, descending into Xibalba not to be destroyed, but to outsmart it through intelligence and preparation. Death, in these traditions, isn't an ending or a punishment. It's a transformative process, a stripping away of false identity until only the essential self remains. But even with these ancient maps in hand, one final question echoes through every corridor and gate, a question no blueprint can truly answer.
So, the most isolated civilizations on Earth, separated by thousands of years and miles, drew the same terrifying map. Neuroscience reveals the dying brain's predictable cascade. Psychology unearths universal archetypes. Anthropology collects convergent testimonies from 2000 BCE Sumer to 8th century Tibet. They show us the consistent stage on which death unfolds. Ancient architects of the afterlife took all of this, the neurological, the psychological, the observed, and built it into space, into a universal blueprint. They created a guide to navigate the final, inescapable journey.